So thank you all for kind of being here and taking the time. Super excited to kind of walk you guys through some of what I've learned over the course of, working in the startup space. I know that like I spoke in my little breakout group, I spoke to a couple of accountants and I was making a joke that like accountants have no work-life balance. So this really does apply to everyone. And it's something that I hold dear to my heart because if it's not your own company and you're not a founder yourself, we shouldn't be working all those hours. But even if you are a founder, it's super, super important to really understand what burnout is and at what pace do you eventually give up. And I know there's like a whole bunch of articles and like if you follow some of the major companies that have kind of done this and they've done it well, you'll kind of see what's worked and what hasn't worked. One of the main things that I like to tell people is that it's so important to cap overtime. So when you're working, especially now that we're working from home, a lot of us are putting in way more hours than we may have initially just because we want to get shit done and keep ourselves busy. But eventually what that'll do is you will not be able to distance yourself from that. And it just becomes a cycle and you get dwelled just into work. Especially when you're so young, it's really important to obviously work and do things that you love. But I think it's also really important for you to kind of make time for yourself. Obviously, we're not traveling at this time of our lives, but go on walks, relax, have a life outside of work, whether it's picking up the calls and like speaking to old friends or figuring out things that you want to do, learning a new hobby, coloring somebody's hair, do something that you can do to give yourself some time. And then this also applies when you go back into the physical space and time management. So daily, weekly, monthly. I know people hate journaling and it's so old school, but truthfully, when you work in a very fast-paced world, especially the tech industries and the startup culture, it's so important. Like I'm a pen and paper type of person, and if you're not, that's totally fine. But just always have a check-in sheet. It'll keep you accountable. It'll keep those around you accountable, and it'll also kind of help you balance things out and prioritize. People talk about prioritization as if it's um, something that's like a skill to be learned. I think as you grow in a role, that's when you learn to prioritize. You could have been great in your role previously and prioritized everything that you've had going on, but life changes, you change, you adapt, roles change. So it's the most important thing I think with regards to prioritization is understanding the new roles that you're in, understanding your life changes and working around that. And that's really how you can prioritize and prioritize yourself in the right way and the right direction. Meetings. I hate meetings. When I see blockers in people's calendars, it's so important to really understand like having that face time, especially now due to COVID, is so important. But we started doing this daily syncs at one point, and it got way too out of hand. Meetings are a waste of time, in my opinion, especially if it's redundant, and especially if there's 20 of us, and if we all spend 30 minutes, that's a lot of minutes that we're spending of each person's time that we could have possibly put towards something else. So just again, having that right mindset and understanding what the importance is and like what your end goal is so important. Sometimes you can come off as being a dick or an ass because you're going to go into a meeting and be like, this is my agenda. And like, I'll talk to you guys about other stuff later on. But I think it'll help you regain focus. And that's so important. And then exercise. So again, like that comes down to making time for yourself. But in the physical space where you're back at work, it's so important to take a break and go for a walk and grab a coffee or just go for a walk at a lunch, like during your lunch. Because many people, I find you just get stuck to your desk and you're working like 9 to 5 at your desk or 9 to 9. And you kind of get up and you're like, damn, besides my pee breaks or my break to go get coffee or food, I haven't really done anything else. And so I think it's so important to just get up and walk or message a person on Slack or whatever it is and be like, hey, do you want to quickly run down, walk down the street, get a bubble tea? I don't know, do something. But it's so important to get that in. And then I said, I'm going to talk about perks. So a lot of these tech companies, we offer something called great employee benefits. And what those are like dinners and lunches and breakfast and drinks and socials to keep employees engaged and to obviously keep kind of the wheel turning. My experience of all of that is if companies are giving you guys a whole bunch of that, that means they want a whole bunch of you back in return. So nothing is ever free. And that's so important for people to understand. One thing that Shopify LinkedIn, a whole bunch of companies like Clearbanc, we all started doing was started giving out lunches and breakfast and like dinners for people who work late. But one thing that we started realizing, A, it's a taxable benefit back to the employee. But B, it's also, even if the company's eating up a lot of the cost, the reason they're doing that in most cases is that there's a good chunk of you that you're putting towards your work. And there's a good chunk of you that you're putting towards the company. So another really important thing to learn and to understand, appreciate is these perks are obviously there for you to utilize. And of course, they're very, very, very appealing. But it's also important for you to understand that sometimes you shouldn't stay past a certain time. And that's when it's so important to cap your overtime hours. That's when it's important to understand what burnout looks like. Burnout in the tech space is so real. You'll talk to a lot of founders, and a lot of founders have worked for companies themselves, and they go through this peak period where you're growing with the company and you're doing so much, and then you'll realize eventually that either you're dispensable, everyone's always dispensable, or that you're just hitting a peak where you can't keep up with that anymore. And that's normal, but it's not okay, because eventually your well-being matters. So a lot more companies are now kind of starting to change the realm. And I think it's going to be interesting after COVID to see how people do this, because a lot of companies are now implementing permanent work from home strategies. And they're also kind of looking at what it could look like to have people come in only a couple of days a week and have people work from home the remaining days of the week. So I think that companies are going to evolve. I've even heard rumors of certain spaces turning their physical desk space into like actual meetup areas, and then having employees kind of rotate and come into the office just to hang out. So that would be interesting to see how certain tech companies and other companies kind of take that idea and kind of run with it. But overall, I think one of the most important things, especially when working for startups, is really understanding what your passion is, what you want to get out of it, and how much time and commitment you want to put towards it, if that makes sense.
Cool. Thank you, Aranee.
In terms of burnout, like what are you at Clearbanc, like what are the signs that you see as an employer that are kind of like indicative of it? And then how do you like get someone out of that sort of state? You know what I mean? Or how can you like bring them back from the brink sort of thing?
It's hard because everyone takes burnout. Everyone looks at burnout differently. In terms of Clearbanc, like when we start, the company grew from 30 to 200 in about 8 months. So burnout was real. Like everyone was working all sorts of hours. And what it looked like was angry messages, late night Slacks, emails. What it started looking like was people de-stress in different ways, right? And you can see that as a result in the work that you produce, or the ideas that you bring to the table, or how managers start handling balance, and it becomes very visible. How do you handle that? Honestly, it's really important to have open line of communication with your employees. And it's really important to have open line of communications with your managers and being real. I think a lot of people, and I've done this too, I'm guilty of it, where you're like, hey, how are you? And you kind of go, oh yeah, like I'm great. I had like a day to rest. But like, it's not okay. It's not okay to work all sorts of crazy hours. It's not okay not to take time for yourself, or to realize you've gained 30 to 40 pounds because you've put zero time into yourself, right? And it's interesting because like Clearbanc has a different mentality where it's 5 founders, 4 founders. And so the company did shares for all employees, right? And opened up options. And so they were like, this is essentially, even if you own a small part of the company, now you're an essential owner, right? But again, obviously you got to look into the red lines of how all of that works, right? The most important thing that I think that you need to do for yourself, or as a founder or as a fellow employee, is take time and literally like log off. So if you're traveling, like I don't know how many people do this, but like no Slack, no emails, cold turkey. Like if you can't do that and you can't step away from work in that way, they haven't set you up for success.
Nice. Quick question, actually. I wanted to break out and then you guys can discuss as well. But one of the things now that's happening is the whole work from home aspect. And you mentioned it briefly. Do you think that's actually going to improve work-life balance, or do you think it might like actually deteriorate it?
My honest opinion is that I think it'll deteriorate because a lot more people, and stats have kind of shown this, is that people feel like they need to work more or prove themselves, or like you kind of feel guilty if someone sends you a message. And I don't know, you guys can do a show of hands to kind of show me if you guys feel that way. But if someone like if a manager messages you and you're not in front of your computer, how many of you kind of get like that panic moment where you're like, oh my God, they're gonna think I'm not working,
100%.
right? And so due to that, you're gonna kind of constantly be glued to your phone or glued to your screen at all times. And also it's kind of the fact that like right now we're always thinking like, well, I don't really have anything better to do. And I've heard that from so many people. And the truth is that like that and like that is going to get you to work longer and harder as well. And people also want to work longer and harder because they want to prove that they can do this well, so that their employers will let them work from home for the next unforeseeable, well, until COVID is over, which is God knows how long, right? So I've also heard that side of it. So I just think that there might not be a balance due to that.